been able to open a bank account, but they still charge you immigration fees of $1,600. They'll charge you an immigration health surcharge. How are you going to pay for that? It's about not being able to access healthcare. I'll come on to healthcare later on. It's about sharing your data. It's about not being able to see your own data. Everyone else can see it, but you can't see your own data. It's about restricting legal aid. It's about the no recourse to public funds issue. It's about separating families. Let's not think that it's just Trump that separates families. Any of us who've had the misfortune of having to talk to social workers and deal with Section 17 cases will know very well that local government does it as well. It's about monitoring your child at school. It's about a whole range of complexities that actually say, no, the UK's not open, it's closed. So let's look now at how this impacts on a couple of communities. So very kindly, as our colleagues talked about, refugee status. Now, it's easy. People often class refugees as the nicer side. That's the humanitarian side of the UK. Look, we take on these refugees. 20,000 Syrians the UK committed to. How many have we taken on? Any guess?
80? 100?
Not near enough. About 2,000. Yeah. We do well, don't we? We said we'd do that by 2020. So where are we doing this? We shift the blame. Immigration policy is very, very good at shifting the blame constantly. But refugee status, the issue around 28 days, you get your paperwork, and then within 28 days, you're meant to get a national insurance number, find new accommodation, feed yourself, support yourself, and sustain yourself. Who could do that even if they spoke English and knew their way around a locality? You know, it's enormously, enormously difficult. And time again, community groups have put pressure on the government and said the 28-day limit is unrealistic. What does the government's response to that? Oh yeah, we're here. What are we going to do? Oh, we're going to tell G4S to sort it out. Because what they're proposing now is they're preparing for new contracts for asylum seeker housing. And in that, they're going to make sure that G4S and the organisations, because let's face it, it'll be G4S or Serco that get it, they're going to make them responsible for helping people out during the 28 days. That's going to happen, isn't it? Let's get real about this. So there's huge challenges around that. Asylum seekers not being able to work. Considerable problem, considerable issue. The inhumanity of it, the forcing people into further poverty, absolutely disgraceful. There is a national campaign. If colleagues are interested, I would urge you to look at Refugee Action's website, because they're leading on the campaign for right to work for asylum seekers. We've also got across all of this the whole issue around Brexit. Dare I mention that the B word? And I don't know if anybody's seen Operation Yellowhammer today. Has nobody seen this yet? Or you see it on the news tonight? Apparently a civil servant was walking out of Downing Street and unfortunately forgot to put all his paperwork in a folder, because obviously you can just walk around with confidential documents like that. And the cameras have picked up exactly what the emergency planning systems are around Brexit. So it'll be on the news tonight, so I'd encourage you to, and it's called Operation Yellowhammer. So it's a comedy of errors. But Brexit speaks to a completely and utter different language around migration. If the reason for Brexit was migration, then surely we should be starting to see something better, because the racists have won. The racists have won, they've got their wish, right? Because we're leaving Europe. But it's not changing, is it? Where is our progressive immigration policy that we were promised? Where's the humanity? None of it's here, none of it's developed, and none of it's landed. And why? Because the government's in a mess. And the government hasn't realised. Why are we all of a sudden seeing a big campaign around NHS recruitment? Because nobody thought pre-Brexit, how are you going to run your NHS? Right? We're seeing panic in nearly every single sector. The Migrant Rights Network runs a all-parliamentary group, and our big focus around that at the moment is skills. And time again, every industry, every sector we talk to is saying, we're petrified of Brexit, we're not going to have any staff. And this is the first moment where we're starting to recognise the contribution of minority communities after decades and decades, near on a century of contribution. It's absolutely ridiculous and vile, but it's taken Brexit to wake some people up. Allied to that is the Windrush scandal. Now, a lot has been written and said about Windrush as being a significant moment in time, a time that changes and wins over hearts and minds. I was at a parliamentary meeting yesterday where they're shared some research that said that the people who were most sympathetic to the Windrush generation, who would you guess? Who would you guess was the most sympathetic towards the Windrush generation? What type of people? Older people, younger people, men, women, black, white?
Younger students, mostly, mainly.
No, it was the racists. It was the racists, and it was the older generation of racists. And why? Because it impacted on their sense of fairness. This isn't British. We're chucking out people who are British. And Windrush has been a key moment because it's woken people up to some of the complexities around immigration. It is very difficult to talk about immigration unless you can pull at hearts and strings. And the reason why Windrush was so emotive was that people knew that there were people in their street affected by it. Immigration wasn't something that was happening over there or happening over there. It was happening to the people in their community, and it is still happening. But there's huge problems around the Windrush compensation scheme, if anybody's seen it. The Windrush compensation scheme hasn't even begun because the government didn't handle its first part of the consultation properly. And what did it do? It put out 5 questions and it asked people to give it their information and to give their personal contact details if they wanted to reply. Now, does that not mean that they then have the intelligence to come after you if you haven't got papers? Why would you do that? And there's a huge challenge around how, and we challenge the government on how they've structured that scheme. They have now gone back out and called for a compensation, they've called for evidence about how they should structure a compensation scheme for the Windrush generation. If you get an opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, please do reply to that compensation consultation. It closes on the 11th of October. What we are championing is a commitment that the government doesn't put a limit or a tariff on the amount that people are awarded as compensation. How can you award somebody for losing their family, for being deported unnecessarily, for not having a home, for losing their job and their work? The other issue to bear in mind as well, and so I'm just going to come on to actually just talking about how this all comes together, what we can practically do about it. Because it's easy to sit there and moan. And as somebody recently said to me, which I thought was an inspirational quote, was, Martin Luther King didn't win because he said, I have a complaint. He said he won because he said, I have a dream. And we don't dream of a positive immigration policy. We always talk about the negative. And we need to acknowledge the negative, and we need to carry on challenging it, and we need to carry on campaigning about it. But we do also need to start putting forward solutions. So some of the things that are happening currently at the moment. We've got the People's Permanent Tribunal. This is an international committee that goes around to different countries. They've had hearings in Barcelona, in Paris, in Morocco, and they look at how asylum seekers and migrants are being treated in the UK. You are all welcome to come and join in. If you look at the Migrant Rights website, you will see, and I'll share it with the organisers as well, a call for evidence. So stories like our colleagues here, stories that many of you must have encountered, please do share them, because this is an international tribunal. This is a group of judges from outside the UK who are going to pass judgment on the UK's immigration policy and attitudes. The hearings are in London on the 11th, on the first week in November, and you are welcome to get involved with us, and also there's opportunities for people to come down that weekend. We will put you up and help you structure, or you can just come and observe as well. So please do consider that as an option. But the very basis of that People's Permanent Tribunal is around the poverty issue as well, and challenging the deprivation that so many migrants from all communities are affected by. And we're very glad that actually we do have quite a few trade union representatives on that as well. If we can't offer people the basic right to work and the basic dignity that brings, then how do we actually expect them to build a life for themselves in the UK? We also have coming up at the moment the UN Rapporteur, who is seeking evidence around how poverty is impacting on people as well. And they're very interested in hearing about how migrants in particular are affected by this lack of access to public funds and a whole host of other things. Again, we are putting in a response. If the closing date for that is the 14th of September, next Friday. If you don't have time yourselves and you want to piggyback on our response, please do look at the website and you're more than welcome to join in. And I'm going to end on 2 other quick points. Somebody mentioned modern day slavery. I would add a note of caution about modern day slavery, because post-Brexit, We are seeing an uprise in conversations about modern day slavery because it's another excuse to say this is a caring government that is trying to help the vulnerable. If you look at how modern day slavery is being used in the media, in the government's own press releases, they talk about modern day slavery when they do immigration raids. It's a mask for actually saying that immigration enforcement is more palatable as well. So I'd ask you to consider that. Bearing also in mind around homelessness services as well. I've seen previously you've had engagement around homelessness. Chris talked earlier about incentivising. Did you know that most of the contracts for homelessness services in the UK at the moment are incentivised to help people to go back rather than stay? That's worth exploring when you're working with an outreach team. Are you going to get a bonus if this person goes back, or are you going to get paid a lower premium for if they stay in the UK? Not many people look at the contractual powers behind some of these clauses and the money arrangements. And I'll end on one of the things that we're working on at the moment, which is around the health issue. We all know, and we've all experienced for a long time, that migrants from all communities find it extremely difficult to access a GP, to register with a GP. We're all used to seeing the barriers when the practice manager goes, you need a passport. No, you don't need a passport. There's nothing in the guidance that requires you to provide a passport. But that's always what the practice manager says. We're used to that gatekeeping. What we're now seeing is a movement of health and using health to control the migrant population. And that's by intensifying the access opportunity where even people in A&E have to show their passport. And that's disgraceful. That's absolutely disgraceful. But also at the same time, we're seeing a change around charging. So there's more of a strict response to actually charging migrants for health services and especially secondary care. GPs are still free, but all secondary care is chargeable. So let me ask you, how much do you think an average non-complicated maternity delivery costs? Take a guess. 20,000? Was she having triplets? 4,000? 6,000. £6,000 for a non-complicated delivery. Now, I would stress to you that maternity care is still considered an urgent service, so it can't be restricted, and it's not dependent on you being able to pay up front, which is a ridiculous issue as well. And hospitals now have overseas managers to manage all of this as well. It's become a whole industry in itself. We also have data sharing, and this is where the Migrant Rights Network is taking the government to court, and I'll end on this. We are at the moment engaged with our colleagues at Liberty in a legal discussion with the Home Office around its requirement for NHS Digital, which is the records that the NHS keeps, to share all of its records with the Home Office. That's another form of control. You can easily track people through that, and it's a deterrent. So we argued for a long time, and that has subtly been withdrawn, but with a caveat that the Home Office still hasn't developed an official new memorandum of understanding, and as we all know, if nothing's committed to paper, then it's actually, there's a lot of grey areas and things can go wrong. So we're still pushing for a memorandum of understanding that's very clear, that says there is no data sharing. There should be no data sharing between NHS Digital and the Home Office, because access to healthcare, access to home, and access to a basic dignity around your own well-being is a fundamental human right. It is to our collective shame that this government and previous governments have failed to live up to the promise for so many in this community. Thank you.